Hello everyone, let me just get a little bit more into position. Just move this ever so slightly. There we go. How are you all? So this is Kaprogman. I'm just going to close this window because I don't need it. So this is Kaprogman, and from .netcore.kaprogman.com, let me point it a little better. Oh bother, it's around there somewhere. So you'll have noticed it's only been a week since I last live streamed, and this is something I'm going to try a little bit more often. I'm going to try and live stream a little bit more often, just to get more code written, because why not? I'm working on, let me put it this way, I've had a suggestion for a piece of software, and an idea has sort of built around that. If you're aware of a configuration CMDB. A CMDB. So let's go to my Google. So what I've done is I've created this repo here. So this repo just has a bunch of documentation on it. If you were watching the Twitter, you'll have seen that I put out a tweet about this earlier on, because this is what we're going to work against. So what we're essentially going to do, what I'm going to be doing is, I'll come back to like all of those things, right? I've created a spec. So let's see whether this works. I hope it does. Here we go. So what we're going to do is we're going to build a configuration maintenance database. Now a configuration maintenance database, let me just bring you in a little bit closer so you can see me a little better. Alter that. Sorry for the brrr just then. Just need to move the microphone a little. There we go. Really, I should have muted that before I moved it. But essentially we're going to start to create using TDD. Remember, I did a video about that just last week. If you don't remember that, I'll put a link in the chat in a moment. And for anyone watching on YouTube, there'll be a link in the description below, or to the side, that side, I guess, because they usually appear on that side in the current design for YouTube. So we're going to use test-driven development to create a CMDB application, a configuration management database. The idea with a configuration management database, let me just zoom in a little bit, that's not going to work, try that, there we go, is essentially you have a data warehouse of all of your IT infrastructure. So all of your laptops, your computers, any smartphones, scanners, printers, that kind of thing. So then when when a member of staff comes to you and says, I want a new laptop, then you can say, well, actually, we already have 5 spare laptops, so we're not going to buy you one, we'll just give you one of the spare ones, or vice versa. It can also help with, if you ever have a break-in, you can keep track of what's been stolen. You can keep track of if staff are taking their laptops home. You could keep track of who's taking what home and when they were taken out, when they were brought back. It's really quite useful. Let me zoom out of there, go back to 100%. So what I've done here is I spent this morning writing a little bit of a spec for us. And essentially what we're going to do, and we're not going to do this in one stream, we're going to do this in multiple streams. What we're going to do is we're going to very slowly build up a test-driven development web API system with a front end, and I haven't decided on what the front end's going to be. And it's going to have it's going to represent a database of resource items, and a resource item for the initial steps as we start to build it up. A resource item is going to have a name and a location and an is deleted, so that we can soft delete things and keep track of who's deleted what. Eventually, at the moment, it's just going to have those three fields, 2 strings and a bool, and that's it. And we have 3 user stories, and that is, let's have a look. So as a user, I would like to see a list of all the resource items in the system, so that I can see what we have in the system. As a user, I want to add a resource item to the system. And as a user, I want to see a read-only view of the properties of a resource item. And essentially, that's what we're going to do. We're going to do the create and the read. We're not going to do update or delete. And we may not even get past the first 2 of those 4. We're just going to see how we go. The initial design is that we're going to do test-driven development using C# and .NET Core. we're going to use 4 layers. Persistence. Oh, that's gone really dark then. Persistence. I'll do it this way. Persistence, business logic, web API, and a UI for the front end. So the idea is going to be a web application, but we're going to use all sorts of different technologies in the intervening levels. And I've settled on Insti Framework Core, and we're going to use for now SQLite, because I'm currently doing this on my MacBook Air, which is just the machine that I'm talking to you through. And I haven't installed SQL Server, although there is a version of SQL Server for Linux, and that's for multiple different distributions of Linux. I do have on the computer that's just over here, I mean, I'll show you later, on my desktop I have a version of Ubuntu Mate, and we can move to that eventually, but essentially it's adding a different library and changing the connection string. But that's something we'll get to eventually. We're not going to get to that yet. And eventually, as of today, there's no user interface design yet, but we'll have one soon. Okay, so if you want to play along, you'll need to go to this URL, which I'll come back to some of the other things in here at the moment. I will put a link to this in. Did I copy that? Probably not. Let's try again. Copy that and put that in the chat if it's going to paste. There we go. So if you're watching along, there's a URL there that you can use to click through to get to this repo. I'm going to be using Git Flow, and anyone can submit any kind of pull requests or help me build this if they want to. It's entirely open source, so you can see here I'm releasing under an MIT license. I don't know whether you can see my mouse pointer actually, you probably can't, but I'm releasing under an MIT license. But the one thing that is important to me is that you agree to the code of conduct. So I have a code of conduct for this, and if you click through you can read it. It essentially is be nice to everyone. Don't be horrible to each other, don't post anything that would upset anyone, that kind of thing. So if you want to help out, more than welcome. I do have a pull requests welcome badge, so if you want to help out, that's fantastic. If it's, you can code review, you can help with typos, you can help with actual code if you want, I don't mind. So if you want to help out you can, but you need to read through and accept the code of conduct. And like I say, it's nothing hugely, it's not something massive, it's just, you know, be nice to each other. No unethical or unprofessional conduct, no trolling, no harassment, that kind of thing. So that's that, and I'm going to be using, where are we? So I've got a badge here that says, you know, pull requests are welcome. You can see it here, they are welcome, but I would prefer that you agree to the code of conduct. And we'll have, if people agree to, if folks want to submit pull requests, I'll put a contributors page in here as well, so you can see your name on here in a markdown file, and you know, you can edit that if you want and link to things. So like if you want to contribute and you want to link to your website, you know, that will be there for you. If you want to contribute and link to your Twitter or a GitHub profile, then that's fine as well. I'm going to be using Git Flow. So that is essentially, I have a master branch and a development branch, and when I want to create a feature, I'll branch off of development until the feature is complete, and then I'll merge that into development. And when I'm ready to draw a line under the sand and say that all of these things are ready for master, I'll merge back to master, and then we'll have a build script that I don't know where it's going to be built, how it's going to be stored, but we'll have a build that happens whenever we merge back to master. So that's what this section is all about. It's a little description of how we're going to do it with a little bit of a worked feature in these bullet points here. So have a look through that if you want. I've also put the whole thing up on CodeTriage, so that should help us with tracking down people who want to help out. I'm just going to turn this up. Tracking down people who want to help out, and you can issue pull requests and issues and things like that through CodeTriage if you want to. You really don't have to, but that's something that I'm going to be looking towards doing anyway. You can see already I've created 2 branches. When it catches up, I've got a development branch which I'm going to switch to on my computer. We'll do that in a moment. And we also have a master branch here. Can I highlight that? I'm looking at the other screen. I have the screen here for the laptop, and I have another screen there. So if you're new to my streams, you'll notice I spend a lot of time facing this way, and that's because I have a screen here next to my microphone, which has the screen has all of the code on it, and I'll be writing code facing this way. But when I want to have a chat with you or tell you something, I'll turn back and I'll talk to you this way, because it's a bit rude for me to continue looking this way and not even talk to you. So, as I say, there's a link in the chat for anyone who's watching live, and we're going to go through the steps of creating this. What we're going to do is we're going to kind of cheat a little bit, but only a little. So if I go back to here, we can see that I've already pulled the code, and we already have, all we have is a code of conduct, a license, a readme, and a spec. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new branch. I hope you can see this. So what we're going to do is we're going to call this, let's have a look. We are going to create a service. So for the service, we're going to say create a new branch, and we'll say feature service. We'll call it feature resource item service. So every individual thing in a CMDB is called a resource item. So we're going to enter that, and you can see down here in the bottom corner, over here you can see, for some reason OBS isn't tracking my mouse pointer, but hopefully you can see in the bottom left hand corner of the screen where it's flashing a little bit, I'm flitting between the settings button and the name of the branch. You can see it over on that side, sorry, all the way on the other side, the right hand side of the view, it says feature resource item. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to cheat a little bit, only slightly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy some code that I've written earlier, only because I'm still having issues with TDD stuff on this machine. So let's go into my code carters folder. You won't be able to see this, but let's take this CS proj. So we'll go over here and we'll say, can I please have, where are we? These ones? Nope. Oh, bother. These ones? There we go. Toggle, oops, I'll type that twice now. Toggle integrated terminal. There we go. So if I do an ls here, you can see I just have those files. So let's do .NET. Let's turn that down actually, because it's trapping all of these key presses. So I'll just speak louder rather than turning the microphone gain up. So .NET new xunit, give it the name tests, and that will go away, and you'll see it happen in the side of the window there. It will create a directory called tests, and it'll do a .NET restore, and it will add some things. You can see that happening. So I've got a test.csproj. What I'm going to do here is I am essentially going to, whoops, I think I just told that to open with Visual Studio. I'm going to essentially steal some code that I wrote earlier. This is my FizzBuzz application. So let's steal that just to make it easier, less setup required. That's going to complain because there isn't a source CS proj, so let's go make that now. So if I go toggle integrated terminal, bring that back up, and I go .NET new, whoops, new, we're going to create a class library, and we're going to give it the name source. Now we're going to be doing a lot of refactoring as we build this. A lot of this is going to change as we do it. Remember, we're going to use test-driven development. And here we go. And test-driven development. Let's just check that the tests work. So if this doesn't work, it's going to be a very short stream. .NET xunit. And what I'm going to do as well is I'm going to do this. Make that tick. Now, if I maximize that screen, I don't really want to maximize it because then I lose some stuff. So let's just make that screen a little bigger so I can see it. Now, there you go. Now, how does that look? Let's have a look at the, so I've got a preview of the stream. Oh, bother, I've lost half of the window now. Let's just bring that in. Tell you what I'll do. Bear with me 1 second whilst I redo these, because I should have done this earlier. So I will be back in a moment. Okay, now we're back. that should be looking a little better, but it's not. Just bear with me a second, I'll try it again. That's not muted. Unmute. There we go, that should be better, shouldn't it? You should be able to see the entire window now. Sorry about that, I really should have done that before I started. But there we go, and you also heard me doing a bit of a mumbly song, which is not very good. But, right, let's save that and check that the unit tests work. So there was an error a few weeks back with XUnit that should be fixed by now. Let's see whether it's fixed. So it's building.NET Framework, .NET Core App 2.1. I already have some changes in my CS Proj stuff. It looks like it's going to work. I'm just going to go and close this door because there's a door behind me that's open, and every time I turn my head it affects the brightness because the light is shining off of the door. So again, I should have done this before we started, but just bear with me a second. Sorry about that, everyone. Right then, here we go. So as you can see, we've done some tests. We haven't written any tests, but no tests fail. So that's fantastic. Remember the key to test-driven development. I should just put my phone on silent. The key to test-driven development is that we write no production code. We write a failing unit test, and then we then write the production code in just enough production code to make the unit test pass. So let's go do that. So what do we need to do? So let's have another look at the spec. Okay, so if I go back to our spec window and I go to spec, so we know in the domain specific language that was used to write this to write the spec, we need to have a resource item, and a resource item has three properties. It's got a name, it's got a location, and it's got whether it's been deleted or not. We also know that we need some kind of business logic that allows us to see a list of them, to add one, and to find the details, a read-only details view of one of them. So let's go back to our code window. So what we need to do, I would say, we're going to go inside out. If you remember from my previous videos, I'll put a link in the view, actually, in the chat. So if I look for a, if I get a link to my previous video, you'll have to bear with me a second. I really should have done this before I started. I apologise, everyone. It's a little unprofessional of me, but then I'm not a professional streamer, so there we go. So if I take that link address and I place this into the chat, you should be able to see in the chat now a link to my most recent stream where I talked about test-driven development, fizzing and buzzing. TDDing, fizzing and buzzing. So that's a link on YouTube. Anybody who's watching on YouTube, there will be a link in the show notes below, so please check those out. I am going to have to find something to wipe my nose with because it's about to start running. I'm so badly prepared for this time. Tell you what we'll do, we shall use here we go. Some totally not specific branded tissues with a furry monster on the front of them. That's what we'll do. And I'm just going to dab up my nose. There we go. That's better. Now then, yeah, so I apologise in advance. I do have a bit of a cold, it seems. So let's have a look at unit test class 1. So what we're going to do is we're going to write a... So let's make some comments. We are going to create a service. We want the service to return something. And that's about it. Okay, so remember... Oh, bother, now I'm getting all of these windows here. You haven't restored... Doesn't like that I do an empty comment there. Oh well. So let's rename this to resource. Whoops. Item. Resource service. Service tests. I like putting the word test into the name of the class, just because it keeps it so that I know that I'm. Oh bother! What have I done there? I know that I'm copying in the correct thing. So copy. Oh bother! Resource service tests. You can tell I'm not well because I'm not doing this very well. So I'm going to be using source. Now I'm going to be renaming and refactoring as I go, but for now we've got one class library called source. We'll more than likely rename this, or we'll put this within another directory, I think. So let's have a look. So we need to include source. We need to check that it exists. So first thing we do is we go var service equals new. What did we say it was called? Resource service. Now, whoops. Now remember, a failure to compile is also the same as a failure. A failure to compile is the same as a test failure. So if I do .NET xunit, what will happen is it will fail to compile, which is a failed test. Now we'll just give it a moment to catch up. So it's building the things. It's going to try and figure out what a resource service is. I'm already seeing it in the IDE. There we go. The typo namespace resource service could not be found. Are you missing a directive or assembly reference? We're not, but so that's our first test has failed. That's fine. So what we need to do is we need to go and rename this resource service. So that's our class. We've been renamed resource service. We're going to rename the file just to make it easier to handle. Make sure we've saved everything because I fell into that trap last time. If you watched the previous stream, there was a point where I didn't actually save my changes, then tried to do a test, and the test passed, although it should have failed because I hadn't changed the file. So let's do a .NET restore, just to make sure that the tests directory, the tests project gets the latest version of the build of the source project. You can see it there, it's building it. So let's do .NET xunit. This test now, the it exists, should now pass. Just need to give it a moment to catch up. Building for .NET framework. Building for framework, and then Here we go. I'm just going to do this. Wow, that is the sound of my laptop. What I think I should do is perhaps I should move my microphone, because I can hear a shh. So bear with me a second. I'm going to mute. I'm going to move the microphone, and we'll try again. We'll try to continue. So just bear with me. Hello everyone and welcome back. So you should now be hearing less of a hiss. The hiss was from, so I have a MacBook Air, and the MacBook Air, because I'm doing a lot with GPU, the GPU for the MacBook Air is going a bit, as my brother would say, it's going a bit Nova. So it's trying to keep itself cool. Just move these out of the way. Trying to keep itself cool, and you can hear it going in the previous 20-25 minutes of the stream. Now then, right, so we've created a resource service. This test now passes. So what we need to do is we need to test that the resource service has a method. Let's say we have a getAll method. Okay, so that would satisfy one of our requirements. If we switch back here, it will satisfy this requirement here for now. So if we switch back to the code, so we want to do that. So let's do a fact. Let's do public void getAll exists. There we go. So we now have a getAll method. I'm just going to turn this down a little bit further. We have a getAll method. No, I'll turn that up a little bit. There we go. Now you can still see the... Anyway, right. Okay. So what we need to do here is we need to ensure that the getAll method exists. So we'll create another service. Create an instance of the service. New resource. Whoops, that's name of. Let's try that again. Just backspace is fine. New resource service. There we go. Right. So that's our, remember there's the arrange, act, assert. Different people call them different things. I like to call it arrange, act, assert. So we've got arrange, we're going to act, we're going to call service.getAll. That's going to complain because that doesn't exist. We're going to get our result equals getAll. Remember, all we're testing is that it exists. So why don't we, I wonder how we do this. So let's check. So xunit catch exception. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the getAll method return an exception, because I'm going to have it return a not implemented exception. To do that, I'm going to have to use yes, there we go. Right. So we're going to borrow some code from the following answer. So this is on Stack Overflow, how to assert that an exception is returned. So I want to show this so that you can see where I'm getting the answer from, to give credit to the original user. This user Nkosi, I don't know. So they've said you can either create an action and then assert that the action has returned one, or you can do it on one line. I tend to like things in one line, so I'm going to use that. Thank you very much, Stack Overflow user Nkosi. Let's give you an upvote because that actually helped me. We'll switch back to the code. What we're going to do is we're going to do this all in one line. So we'll act and assert, paste that in there, get rid of that bit there, act and assert. Now this is going to complain because that doesn't exist. So what I'm going to do is going to go to service.getAll, and we're going to assert a not implemented exception. We're going to run that. We're going to do .NET restore. So remember, I haven't implemented this method yet. We're going to implement it in a minute. We're going to see a compilation error, which is a failed test, and then I expected that to fail. Oh no, of course. So it didn't fail because we didn't run the action yet. If we'd have done it as two separate lines, it would have done. So let's do .NET restore. So what did I do? Oh, I did a .NET restore. We need to do .NET xunit to make sure that the tests pass or fail. This is going to fail because it's not going to compile. It takes a while to build. Eventually. There we go. So resource service does not contain a definition for getAll. So let's go here. We're going to create a public void getAll, and we're going to throw new not implemented exception. Right. Then we do another .NET restore to tell it to go build our source code, our source system. Let's see how yes. I'm just taking my watch off, sorry. Okay, so we built that. Do xunit. This should now pass because we've told it that we want to do to raise an exception. When it does its thing. I don't know why. Maybe I should minimize this window. That should calm it down. And close that. There we go. There we go. You can see that my tests have passed, and that it's all well and good. So, what we need to do a little bit more than it just exists. What about when we get all, we want it to return a list of something. So, fact, because we want it to return something, don't we? So we go public void getAll returns a list. So remember okay, so we're going to do a little bit of refactoring now. We don't need this test anymore because the service exists. We're using it, so we've proved that the service exists. So let's use the constructor. We'll go resource service tests. We don't have any of those. We're going to go private. Whoops. We're going to create a private read-only resource service. We're going to go service equals new resource service test. No, that's not right. resource service. There we go. So we've created a new resource service. Oh, what's wrong with this? Cannot convert that to that. Oh, of course, because I've put a space there. So there we go. Now we no longer need to do the arrange in this test, and we no longer need to create an instance of the service when we run this test because the service already exists. So var result equals service.getAll. That's our arrange, our act. We don't need an arrange, so what we want to do is we want to assert. We want to assert that the result coming back is not null. So assert not null result. We also want to, so in test-driven development, as long as the test tests one thing, you can assert as many times as you want. So we're going to assert that is assignable from list, whoops, do that every time, list of resource items result. Now this is going to fail, first of all, because we need to do using system.collections.generic. So what we're doing here, that's going to complain because getAll currently returns a void and C# doesn't know how to set result to void. This is going to complain because resource system doesn't exist. So let's do a .NET restore to restore our system collections generic. When this returns, it does its thing, and then we're going to do a .NET X unit and it's going to fail to compile. Excuse me. Let me see whether I can hide this window whilst it does its thing. Nope, it's doing its thing. There you go. So, the first failure here, cannot assign void to an implicitly typed variable, is because we're trying to assign the result of service.getAll to result. Now, result here is an implicitly typed variable because we've used the keyword var. What would happen is, at build time, the Roslyn engine would figure out what the return type of getAll is and create a variable called result and store that in there. Similar to how duck typing works on JavaScript and Python and things like that. Excuse me. Problem is getAll returns a void, so it can't figure out what to do with that. So let's make getAll not return void. So let's return a list. Oh bother, it did it again. So return a list of, for now let's return a list of ints. We're going to go using system.collections. Oh, that's code dumb, that's not right. Collections.generic. I'm using an int for now because it's easier to return an int right now than it is to return a complex object, but we'll do that in a moment. So what we need to do is we need to return new list of int. This will make our test pass because this second thing here is saying resource item doesn't exist, but that's fine. So we're going to take care of this first issue here that cannot assign an implicitly typed variable. So we do .NET restore, which will restore the latest version of that. Then when we do .NET X unit, it's going to fail because it doesn't know what resource item is, but we'll fix that in a moment. So .NET X unit. So this is the thing with test-driven development, is you slowly add features to a system and then you're testing all the other things. I only have one feature at the minute, and that is that there is a service and that it returns something. Right, so it doesn't know what resource item is. There. So let's create a class in here. We'll do it all in the same file for now. Resource item. And we'll just create an empty class. Then we'll return a type of resource item here and a type of resource item there. Really, I've done two steps here. I've done two steps. What I've done here is I've created the resource item class, which fixes the issue that was underlined here, this issue here, in that C#.NET Core didn't know what resource item was. I've also fixed the issue of this returning the actual type. So let's set this back to what it was, because I jumped the gun there. So let's return a type of int, save that, we'll do a .NET restore. I don't know whether, do a .NET restore. where are we? Where's my, there we go. .NET restore will happen, it will rebuild, it will build everything in source, and then it will push it into everything in tests, and then we do .NET test, .NET XUnit, take a little break to have a sip. Excuse me. This was originally going to be a 1 hour stream. We're not going to get very far in the 1 hour stream, but I'm going to extend it a little bit because of all the faffing around I did at the beginning. Faff is a technical term for all the British engineers out there. They'll know what it means. For the international engineers, faff is when you don't do something right. So, you can see here that the getAllExists test failed because it didn't return it didn't throw a not implemented exception. So that's this test here. We no longer need to test this because we know it exists because we're calling it and asserting something from the value. So we can actually get rid of this test now because that method exists. So let's get rid of that, rerun the tests. There is a second failure here, but we'll rerun it to get rid of that first failure. I like to do that, work on things one at a time, get rid of the individual failures one at a time until we're at a point where, because it's easier to deal with a single failure, rerun, another failure, rerun, than it is to do with 2 failures and then rerun it. Okay, so in our resource service test getAll returns a list, this method here, we expected it to return a list of resource items, but it actually returned an int. So let's go change that. So that's it here. So let's go resource item, and that's got a complaint here, resource item. There we go. And then we do a .NET restore again. Oh, okay, we'll do a .NET XUnit because I typed the wrong button. I pushed the wrong button. So let's see this happening. You'll notice as well I'm not in the same place that I was in my previous stream. In my previous stream I was at my parents' house. This stream I'm not. So our test literally just checked that it returned a list. It didn't check that the list contained anything, and it's not checking the resource item. So let's create a new class. So we're done now. That essentially does what we wanted it to do. It's not a brilliant set of tests, but it essentially does what we want it to do. So let's save that. Let's create a new file, resource item tests.cs. Now what we want to do is we essentially want to take this, and we want to put this here. There we go. So what we want to do, all we wanted to do was test that. If I switch back to here, you should now be looking at the browser. Let's make sure that's happening. Let's click here. No, you're not looking at the browser. Let's try that. So all we want to do here, we've done this one now. We can return a list of resource items. We're not returning the list, we're returning a list. Notice the wording, a list of, right? We'll fix the rest of it, the all resource items in the system, in a moment. But first, before we do that, we need to create a bunch of resource items. To do that, we need to create the resource item class. So let's go do that. So let's switch back to, I forget what my key combinations are. Oh bother, I can't remember. Let's just do it here. There we go. I did have a shortcut for that, but I can't remember what it was. So we're going to create a public class resource item tests, and in here we want to make sure that the resource item class exists. So we'll create a fact. We're going to say public void voif exists. Now this one is going to pass straight away, so we're going to do act, arrange and act in the same one. Arrange and act. I'm going to go var resource item equals new resource item. Now technically we can get away with not doing this test. What's going on here? Public void exists brackets. Okay, we already know that this test is going to pass because we needed to write something. We needed to ensure that the resource item exists to be able to make sure that the resource service returned them. But we're going to have this test anyway, and let's do this. So we'll do a restore. And then we'll do an XUnit to run the test. Let's see what happens. And eventually this will run our tests, and all our tests will pass. You'll see that we're testing 2 files. Is it 2 files that it's testing? It should be. Yep. Okay. No, that's 2 tests. I wonder why it hasn't picked up my new test. Oh no, because there are only 2 tests. If I go to service tests, there's only 2 tests. There's this one, get all returns a list, and there's this one, that my resource item exists. I don't need to do this one because this one already is doing a thing. So let's do the constructor. We're already testing that with something else. So let's do resource item. We're going to do none of those. Resource item tests. Yeah, tests. Whoops, tests. What we want is we want a private. Do we want to create one? No, we don't. We don't even need the constructor. So let's do this for now. Get rid of this test because we no longer need it. Public void, it has a name. So we are going to go var resource item equals new resource item. Assert not null. Oops. Not null resource item. Just to double sure. Remember, you can assert as many things as you want in a test, as long as you are only testing one thing. We are only going to be testing not null. That takes an object. Let's try that. Resource item dot name. Right. That's going to complain, and we'll see why in a moment. If I hover over it, I don't know whether that shows up, but it says basically resource item does not exist. Let's do a restore, and let's do a run when it restores. .NET X unit. This is going to get gradually slower and slower as we do this, but you'll be able to see as we build this up. So the error here is that resource item does not contain a definition for name, and if we go to resource item up here, remember that's here, let's move this out to its own file, move to that file, let's get rid of, save that, fish build, there we go. So let's get rid of those tests, the resource item tests and the resource item. Resource item doesn't contain one, so let's do public string name get set. So now the field exists, but is this test going to pass? Let's find out. So let's just see how this is going. You can hear me. That's working. Okay, great. So the tests are running. Let me know in the chat if you have any questions and we'll figure them out together. You can see that it's built a .NET standard library from my source. And here we go. Assert not null failure. So why did it fail? Assert not null at line 17, this one. So this is null, is what it's saying. It tried to assert that the value wasn't null, but it's come out as null. So we need to create a constructor here because the default value for a string is null. So let's create a constructor for resource item. We're not going to pass any parameters in. We're going to go name equals new resource item. There we go. So all we're doing is when we create a new one, we're going to force it to have a value of new resource item. So let's save that. Do the tests again. Oh dear. Let's run these tests again, like we did last year. Sorry. Terrible singer. Right, so now my tests pass, because this time around, when we get to not null name, name is set in the constructor to the value new resource item. So when we test that it is not null, it passes, which is fantastic. So what we're going to do is we're going to test that it has a location as well. So let's do that. Fact public void it has a location. Whoops. So let's do var resource item equals new resource item. We could, when we're finished with this test, move this line into the constructor for this set of tests. We're going to assert that it's not null. Resource item. This protects us from if something happens and not null resource item dot well, that's a comma dot location. That's going to complain. We can actually do another test here, and we will in a moment. But before we do that, we need to get these tests running. So let's do a .NET unit. It's going to fail to compile because it doesn't know what location is. As you can see on line 26, you can see we've got the squigglies under the word location. Just bear with me a second. I need to blow my nose, so I'm going to mute. Apparently my sorry about that, everyone. I thought it was probably best that you didn't hear me blow my nose then. So what I've done here, what's happened here is what's happened last time. If you saw my previous stream, you'll have noticed that I got a bunch of test passes when I should have got a test failure. This is what's happened here. I've got 2 tests of passed, but I know, and 0 errors, 0 failed, 0 skipped, but I know I've got 3 tests. What happened? I forgot to save this file, as you can see from the file name resource item tests.cs. I've got you can see it changed to an X when I hover over it. You can't see the mouse pointer, but you can see it changed to an X. So what I've got to do is I've got to save, rerun my tests, and I will expect it to fail this time. Have another drink. Put it down here. Now then, so this will fail because it doesn't know what location is. So we're going to go to add location. There we go. Resource item does not contain a definition for location. So let's do that. So let's say public string location. Get set. Save that. Now, this isn't enough to make it pass, but it's enough to get to the next step. And that is, it's enough to get it to compile. The next step is I'm expecting it to fail because location is a string and its default value is null. So as we'll find out in a second, it will fail on the same line, but for a different reason. Here we go. Test it has location, assert not null, failure. There we go. Because location is set to null because it isn't set to anything. So let's do location equals under the stairs. That's a very, very, very specific reference that I feel like if you don't get, that maybe you're not from an English speaking country, because it's from a series of books and films about a young boy who is really rather famous, and he is also a wizard. There we go. So all my tests pass. Now there's actually something here that I should be doing. So all I'm testing is that it has a thing called a name, and it is not null. We want to test that is a name, has a name, has a string called name. So we're going to property called name. So we're changing this test now to test that we have a string property called name. So to do that, I need to do assert that is assignable from string resource item dot name. So that test will pass. And you're thinking, well, why have you done that? That's not actually added anything. We're not testing that. Well, actually, what happens if Bob comes along and goes, actually, I can store the names in a separate table and look them up with an ID lookup? Well, what will happen there is name becomes name ID, and it won't work. So if I went here and I changed this to a GUID, I'm going to say GUID because I don't know, I feel like I should say it like GUID, and I'll just add that. So let's say I change the name to a GUID. Let's say some migration 6 months down the line means that I need to change the name to a GUID because I'm looking it up via an ID. My tests will fail, as you will see here. Boom. There we go. So first of all, we got a test say never use not null on a GUID, but that's fine because we're not going to do that from this point onwards. But we also get, look, I expected it to be a type of string, but you've given me a system.GUID. So it's always useful to test those things. Whoa, I completely misspelt the name string. So we can actually get rid of system here because we don't need it because there's nothing in there that requires the system. So I'm going to copy this line down to here just to double check. Assert dot is assignable from string resource item dot location. That way, if someone does the same thing to the location, changes it to a GUID or a lookup value, then we'll know that it will break the system. We find out straight away. So let's do one more fact. Remember, there's 3 properties on a resource item. The name, the location, and whether it's deleted or not. At least in this version. So let's do public, whoops, public void. Oh yeah, we need to change this as a string property. Did I say cold? Yep, cold location. So we're not going to return voif, we're going to return it as a string property. This is not a string property, it's a boolean. It's whether it's deleted or not. Boolean property, property cold is deleted. Now, because we're testing a boolean, we can't test to see whether it's null or not. We can throw the test in, but it's going to be a bit weird because a boolean can't be null, it's either true or false. The default value for a boolean is false, so we can't really check whether it's true or false or not, because we're not saying that this is a new resource item. We're also not saying it's an old resource item. We're just saying that the class resource item has a boolean. So what we'll do is we'll go var resource item equals new resource item, and we'll refactor these in a moment. So resource item, we'll go assert dot not null. Oh bother. Not null. There we go. Resource item. We'll check that the resource item isn't null. We'll also assert dot is assignable from bool resource item dot. Now we haven't created it, but we'll go is deleted. Right? So we haven't created it, it's a boolean, and in C#, booleans are either true or false. There's never a null, there's no, the default value is false. So it's going to complain here. We've done this already 1,000 times, maybe not 1,000 times, maybe only about 12 times, but it's going to complain. We're not going to get a build, we're going to get a failing unit test, because remember, a failure to compile is a failed unit test, and is deleted doesn't exist. So there we go, resource item. So let's look at this. Resource item does not contain a definition for is deleted, and there is no extension method called is deleted, which takes the argument of type resource item. So basically, Rosalind can't find a property called is deleted that hangs off of our resource item. So let's go to resource item, and we'll go, oh, let's put that back actually, because that's useful. And we'll go public bool is deleted. Get, I always like to put spaces between the get set and the squiggly brackets. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do that, and we're going to pass. That's all we need to make it pass. I could give it a default value, but I don't need that to make it pass. Let's have a look. Whether or not a default value makes sense is not what we're testing. We're testing whether the property exists, and all of our tests pass. Fantastic. It has a boolean property called is deleted. They all pass. So let's go back here. So we've essentially gotten all of our tests complete. Excuse me. Let's go one step further, and we'll create a helper method that is a factory, which will create a resource item on demand, and then we'll change our service to create some resource items, so that when we call get all, we can check that it actually returns the resource items. So we've had to do all of this to be able to get to the next step. So let's go into resource service. We'll create it in tests actually. Tests. Yeah, we'll create it in tests because it makes more sense there. So resource item factory. That's yes. So this is only ever going to create a bunch of resource items. It's never going to create anything else. Right? And we'll put this in a folder called helpers. So these are test helpers, resource item factory. Yes, we'll move that file. We'll put that there. We'll go tests.helpers. Okay. So all this is going to do public static class resource item factory. Not a gactory, because that doesn't exist. Oops, factory. And we'll create a public static class create resource item. and we'll literally just return new resource item. What doesn't it like about that? Public class. Oh, need the resource item. There we go. Oh, I called it a class. There we go. Public static resource item, create resource item. So this will just return as a brand new resource item instance for us to use. So if I go to my resource service tests, I am going to say I'm going to create a service. When I create my service, let's say I'm going to, for now, resource service. Oh, bother. Close that. Let's say we have a public I list of resource items. Resource items. That needs to be a lowercase r. This needs to be a private because we don't want to expose it. Private list resource item. Resource item. There we go. Fantastic. Now let's say that this takes in a list of resource items. So let's say it takes in a list of resource item. Resource items. Let's say that when we call the constructor, it sets those. That way, we can say, oh, it doesn't know. Let's say in resource items. This is a pattern that I picked up from an old friend of mine. If you have multiple parameters, if you have a parameter which matches the name of a field, either rename the parameter or throw in on it to know, so that you know looking at it it's the version coming in. Now that doesn't really matter. What we need to do is we need to return resource items. I can rename this, refactor to rename this in resource items later. So let's do to list. Nope. Okay, let's just change that to a list. So we no longer need the to list. So I've done a whole bunch of stuff here and I haven't actually changed how the test works. Let me just go, it would be quicker just to do restore myself. So what I've done is I've changed the resource service so that it will take in a list of resource items. We'll change that further down the line so that we can pass in a repository or so that we can pass in the connection to a database, and we'll do it that way. But for now, this test is that the resource service, when you ask for it, when you ask for a get all, it returns a get all. So let's do .NET XUnit. Remember, we do the tiniest amount of work possible to make the next test pass. It's going to complain about this, I think, but I don't know why. Let's have a look. Ah, yes. Okay. So in our constructor here, we are now no longer passing in a list of tests of resource items. So let's do resource items equals new list resource item. There we go. Now we're doing this here just to make it easier so that we can control the test data going in. In a later stage, we'll use a mocking framework and we'll mock some data. But right now, we'll do it manually. So we'll do create. Whoops. We need helpers dot create. Okay. Resource item factory dot create resource item. And then we'll do it again. We'll copy paste. So then we'll get 2 or 3. Copy that, paste that, paste that. So now we're going to resource items. We'll save that. We'll make this pass again. And then it will pass. We also need to add another property to the resource item, but we'll do that slowly. Again, we're doing a building up one by one. So what we're going to do here is we're going to get 3 out, and they're all going to have null names. We need to then add values to the create resource item to make sure that they are not the same value. So the properties aren't set to null, that they're actually set to something. But before we do that, we need to actually give our resource item an ID. Remember, it's going into the database eventually, so a resource item needs to have an ID. So let's do fact And once we've done this test, we'll refactor this test class to make it easier to read. So public void it has an int property called ID. Remember, it's going into the database, so we need to make sure that we have some way of getting it back out of the database. So let's let's take this now. So an int does have, in C#, I've done it again, look. In C#, an int does have a default value, and that default value is 0. Or maybe it's not. Let's do int. Right, so we want to check that ID exists. Whoops, I'm going to give it a lowercase d. We're going to check that it is assignable from an int. We're going to check that it's not null. We're also going to check assert dot not equal default int resource item dot ID. So what we could have done with these tests, with the strings, is we could have replaced not null with a similar format where we do default string. So let's do that. Okay, so we could have, instead of doing assert not null, we could have done assert equal, not equal. We could have done default string resource item dot name, and all that test would have done is would have gotten the default value for a new string and checked that the resource items value is not equal to that. Problem with that, of course, is that you essentially have two strings in memory. So let's not bother with that, because the default value is a static value. It's going to be in memory anyway, but then you're doing string manipulation. A string equals a string. You need to do invariant culture, you need to do current culture, you need to do uppercase, lowercase. Let's just leave it at not null, because I know from reading the C# spec that the default value for a string is null. So let's leave it at that. So these tests are not going to pass. And we can see why. If you've been playing along so far and you've been paying attention, which I'm sure you have done, you'll know why these tests won't pass, and that's because the property ID does not exist on the resource item. There we go. We've got 4 failures. We're going to deal with them one at a time, because for me, that's easier to deal with. So our first failure is resource item does not contain a definition for ID, and no extension method ID accepting the first argument of resource item could be found. So I don't have an ID. So let's open our resource item and let's go. Where's my, oh bother, it's got down there. So let's go, what the, that's really weird. My tab keeps moving down there. Oh well, public int ID get set. Put my spaces in because I like those. Tab, no, it jumps down there. I don't know why. Tab, no, okay, we'll manually put spaces in. I don't like doing this, so we'll just copy those. Copy. I don't know why it's doing that, but there you go. So we've got an ID, so that's the first one passed. So if we run it again, that's why it keeps doing it. Let's turn that off. So I had a feature in Visual Studio Code enabled which changes focus between the terminal window at the bottom, the Explorer on the left, and the code area on the top when I hit tab. Now we did get a warning, so let's have a look at what the warning is. Don't use assert not null on type int. So that's fine, we'll come to that in a moment. What was our failure? Assert not equal failure. So let's have a look. This is on line line 18. So which failure is that? Line 18. So it is. So this test failed. First of all, we're being told not to use not null on that ID. So let's not do that. We're also being told that the check that the ID was not equal to the default int value of 0 has failed. So why don't we, over here, when we do new resource item, we set this ID, let's set it above there, ID equals 1. Okay, because we want the test to pass. We're not bothered about making the code make sense. We want the test to pass first, and then we'll make it make sense. Red, green, refactor. Write the failing unit test, write just enough production code to make the failing test pass, and then refactor it to make it make sense, or refactor it to change the tests. Fantastic, our tests now work. So we can see that all of these things happen. So we've checked that it's not equal to that, and then it is assignable from an int. Let's do those the other way around, just so that if someone changes the ID, let's go do that again. So let's change the ID to a GUID, put a capital G there, and I'm going to say add system. So we'll go system.GUID.new GUID, because it's an extension method. So let's do that. Do a .NET restore. So the reason that I've swapped those around is so that we check that what's happening here. Oh, that's fine. So we check that it is an int first before we check that they are not equal, and that's just my my preference, because then it reads like it makes sense. It reads, I'm checking it's not null, I'm checking that it's an int, and I'm checking it's not equal to the default int value. This is going to fail because remember we're checking that it is assignable to an int, so that's the line that fails. Oh, actually, look, it fails before it even gets there. It's saying I cannot convert not equal of type T, where you've given me, where are we? You've given me an int for my first type, and you've given me a GUID for my second type, so I'm not even going to compile. So let's change this back to 1. It will complain, hey, you can't assign 1 to a GUID. So we'll set this back into an int. There we go. So then this will now be happy. We'll rerun the test just to make sure I haven't broken anything. Fantastic. Right, so that's still working. So if we go to the resource item factory, what I want to do is each time round I want to create a resource item with a different ID. Now again, this is the test code. It's not testing the repository, it's not testing the database, it's just testing what happens if I give the service a bunch of resource items and I want to get them all and I want to check the values, right? So how about I go internal int current ID, and I do, can I do get set on that? I'm sure I can. So then it's only gettable or settable by this. So how about I do, what's wrong with this? Cannot declare instance members, yes, static. There we go. Yes. So how about we do this? We return a new resource item with the ID equals plus plus current ID. So what we're going to do here is we're going to return a new resource item. We're going to hardwire the ID to be this value plus 1, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to no longer make this static because we don't want it to be sitting in memory. We want to ctor it. We're going to see a bunch of, remember this is us making changes and refactoring stuff. So things are going to break, but that's fine. So we're going to current ID equals default. We're going to hardwire this default int. I mean, if you don't, we've just said that if you don't set that value, then it will set it to the. If you don't set the value of the of an int, then C# will set it to 0, and we're just basically ensuring that it's set to 0. We're not going to test this. This is test helper code. So our resource service is now broken because it's saying, hey, I can't access this because it's not a static class anymore. So why don't we go var resource helper factory equals new resource. Oops, it's a resource item factory. What a whirly, I don't even remember what I called my things. Oh, bother. Let's undo all of this. Helpers.resource item factory resource item factory, and then we'll go copy that. The resource item factory create new resource item, and that will create me a brand new one with a different ID, right? So let's go like this. Let's just create 2 for now. Okay. So .NET unit. So in the real system, when we get all of the items, we want to be able to get them and ensure that the IDs are different. So we could do that in multiple different ways. We'll leave this as the final test that we do today. I didn't actually save that. Interesting. We'll leave this as the final test that we do for today, and then we'll come back another time. So, we need to, before we do that, we need to refactor this test look, because we're doing the same thing over and over again. So why don't we create a constructor here, ctor resource item tests. We don't want any parameters. We want a private read-only resource item, like that. And we're going to take this line here, cut that out of there, paste it in there. I keep doing that. For some reason, my paste action also hides this window. I like to have that open because then I can see what I'm doing. In a later stream, I'm going to be using a plugin that allows me to see which tests pass and which tests fail. So we've refactored this so that we now have a constructor which creates the resource item for us, and that resource item is then used throughout all of these tests. So let's make sure that this works. So let's have a look. Just do this. So we're just testing that the changes that we made didn't actually break any of our tests. Fantastic. So what we're going to do is we're going to return a list of tests. We also want is assignable from. Let's do an extra test on here. Assert dot not empty result. So we're going to test that it's not null. We're going to test that it's an assignable from that it is a list of resource items. Then we're going to check that it is not empty. So let's try that, because we're assuming that when we call get all, we get something. That's what we want. We want something back. Fantastic. So, but that's not really a real use case. If you have a brand new system with no resource items, you don't want it to return a list that has something in it. So this test is no good. So what we need to do is in our service, here we are hard coding it with brand new things. So what we want to do is we need to figure out what to do when we have no resource items to return. When we have no resource items, we want the list that is returned to be empty, right? So let's do that. So let's go fact, and then what we'll do is we'll maybe call it quits for today. I don't know. Public void when no resource items to return, get all returns empty list. Okay, does that make sense? So how are we going to do this? In our constructor, we've said that our resource service takes in a list of 2 items, right? But how are we going to do this? So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to go resource service, or we call it service, service equals new resource item service. There we go. Except that's going to complain because our service up here is a read only. So why don't we create a new one? So let's say the service for this test, equals new resource service. Now this wants to take in a list of stuff. So how about we pass in a new list of resource items that is empty. Okay, so we're passing in an empty list. Then we're going to say, so this is our act, this is our range. So then we're going to act, we're going to var result equals service for this test dot get all. So that's our act. So then what else do we want to do? Let's have a look. Just check that this is all working. Occasionally I like to check back. I'm using OBS to do these streams, so occasionally I like to check back into OBS to make sure that everything's working. So let's do, we want to assert. So how do we assert? We want to make sure that result is not null. So assert dot not null result. That's fine. We also want to assert that we haven't broken anything, but it's assignable from a list of resource items. Resource item result. We'll probably refactor this test in a later thing as well. What's wrong with that? Is assignable from... Oh, I haven't closed one of my angle brackets. There we go. Angle brackets. We also want to assert is assert contains assert. Can I do empty? Assert empty result. Oh bother, result. So what we want is when there are no resource items to return from the service, we want getAll to return an empty list. Okay, does that make sense? So when there's nothing in the database, we don't want anything out. Or there's nothing in the storage. We don't care what storage is, as long as when we ask it for something and there's nothing there, we got nothing back. Because it's not a error state to have nothing in there. So when no resource items to return, getAll returns an empty list. getAll returns a list. So let's make another test, one more test. Fact public void when, what do we say, when resource items exist, getAll returns a non-empty list. Okay, so we're going to arrange. Now remember that the way that we're arranging all of our tests so far is we have this this property in our test called resource service, and it's being sent a bunch of tests to run. It's being assigned, our resource service is being assigned a list of resource items to use when we create it. So all we need to do is for our arrange, we don't need to do anything. It's already arranged in our constructor. So for our act, we want to say result. Whoops. Oh bother. Result equals service getAll. And we can do assert not null. Oh bother. Not null. Result. And then we're going to do assert that is assignable from list of resource items result. And then the last thing we're going to do, assert not empty result. So in this one we're testing, so that's our act, that's our assert. We're going to test that when we do a getAll with our default service, which is this one, which should have some resource items in it. When we do getAll, we get a result that is not null, we get a result that is a list of resource items, and we get a result that is not empty. So let's try that. Just going to mute a second, if I can figure out how to do it again. I just wanted to mute whilst I wiped my nose in case I made any kind of type of noise. Sometimes it happens. So test, brilliant, all of our tests pass. So what we've done so far today is we've created a service that returns a number of resource items. How about one last test? We return we do the get method. So far we've done getAll, right? So why don't we rename this? We do a little refactoring and then we'll call it quits. So this is going to be resource service getAll, okay? And then we can, this makes it, we'll come back to why I'm doing it like this in a moment. That's fine. So then if I do resource service tests, drag that into there. Yep. Then we'll change tests dot resource service test, resource service tests dot getAll. There we go. So this will all make sense in a moment. I'm separating my tests out so that you can see. So if I do resource, oh bother, I've put that folder in the wrong place. Let's create a folder here. Resource item tests. Maybe that should be DTO tests. I'm not sure. Yeah, maybe this should be entity tests. Entity tests. and then we can split things out a little bit. So tests.entity tests. So this is a test specifically for our database entities or our data entities. So we'll put that in the entity tests folder. We'll close our helpers. So in our resource service tests, we've got a get all class. We're going to do a public class get. So this is, whoops. So what we're doing here is we're splitting out all of the tests related to a single function in a class. And the reason for that, as you can see, is there are quite a few tests. I'm going to fix all of these in a moment. What's wrong with this? Get all already defines a constructor. Where? That's interesting. Let's close that. Sometimes when you do this, nope. Where? This is an interesting one. So, let's see what .NET XUnit has to say when we do this. Well, also whilst it's doing that, let's search for get all. Yeah, it's just Visual Studio being weird, I guess. So sometimes Visual Studio falls over because it's, well, because it's weird. Get.cs, but that's fine. We're going to ignore that because we literally just did a get, did a test, and it worked. So public class get. I think it's because when I typed get earlier on, it auto-corrected to get all, and then that fell over. So our get tests need to also have a resource service. Oops. And also need to have a resource service. We also need to have a constructor called get. It's going to have no parameters, and it's going to go service equals new resource item service. That's going to complain because it wants a list of things, so we may as well just copy this code. Yeah, let's just copy that code for the get all tests. Paste this here. Right, fantastic. So our first test is that when that get exists. So fact public void exists. Var result equals. We don't even need to catch a result when we do these tests. Service.get act arrange and assert, all in one line. Right, let's do a restore. We don't need to do one, but let's do a restore. Let's do an XUnit. We should get one failure here, and that's a failure to compile because the get method doesn't exist on the service. Yep, resource service doesn't contain a get method, so let's go create that. So resource service public void get. Remember, it's the least amount of code required to make it work. So we'll go like that. .NET XUnit. Now really, my exists test shouldn't be returning the result. It should just literally be calling it. So let's do that. Let's cancel this. We'll let it go. That's going to fail, but that's fine. That's because I've made a change after it started to build. .NET XUnit. Oh, it didn't. Oh, fine. So I managed to change my source code before it actually built everything. That's why that one passed. So what I did was I changed get to just call the method. And if you look here, the get method returns a type of void, so it doesn't actually return anything. So that's fine. That exists. It works. So let's say fact public void get returns a resource item. So let's do var result equals service get. We can get rid of this now because we're using the method, so we've proved that it exists. We're going to do array act, and we're going to do assert. Whoops. assert.not null, not empty, not null, not apparently. Assert not null result. Assert is assignable from resource item result. That will do. So we're checking that the get method returns a resource item. Now this is going to fail. You should be able to, by this point, you should be able to realize why, because we've got some squiggly lines underneath the call to service.get, and that is because, again, service.get returns void, and we're not checking, we can't assign void to an implicitly typed variable, so that's what this error message means. Excuse me, cannot assign void to an implicitly typed variable. So let's go to our service. Get now needs to return a resource item. Now again, remember, least amount of code required, return new resource item. That's right, I keep doing name off for some reason. Resource item. We don't care what we return, we're testing that it returns a resource item. So we make it return a resource item. When this returns, so it's got to rebuild everything, got to get all the there we go. So our test here, return new resource item, works. But what we want to do is we want to make sure that the resource item is actually one in the system. So let's say right. So the first thing we want to do is make sure that it returns one that's in the database. So let's go the target ID equals 1. Change this, and we're passing 1. That's going to break. That's not a problem. Assert dot is assert dot equals target ID result dot ID. So we're saying I'm going to call get. Oh, he wants to do equal instead. I'm going to call get, and I'm going to pass in the target ID of 1. I want one of the things out. I want a specific resource item out, and I want ID of 1. I'm going to check that the value we get out is not null, it's a resource item, and that the ID is equal to. So this is going to fail. You can see why. Again, squiggly lines. The get method does not take in an ID, so it's going to return an error. Oh bother! I've just moved the test outside of the class. What a wally! That's going to fail, presumably. Yep, there we go. Let's try that again. Let's see what the problems are. Lots of problems. Oh dear. We'll check those over in a moment. We'll probably check those over in a different thing. So this is going to fail because there's no get method which takes in. Yep. So this get method is saying get method does not take in int ID. I've managed to do. I managed to turn an insert on. There we go. Oh bother. Yeah, that'll do. So this is now returning a new resource item. So all I've done is change the get method to take in an ID. I haven't changed anything else. Just the get method takes in an ID now. It's then going to run through the test. How's OBS going? It looks like it's still going. That's fine. Okay. So, the same thing from my FizzBuzz video. I didn't save the resource service changes. So let's do that. Do another build. When this happens, it will very quickly happen, eventually, and wallop. So our tests pass. We've passed in an ID. Oh, actually, why did that work? Oh, of course. Yes, so this is the important thing about test-driven development, right? Remember, when I set up my service here, I'm passing in a list of resource items. When I create a resource item, if I go to definition here, I'm giving it the ID of 1. So that test is a useless test. Okay? So that test is a useless test. Passing in 1 will always get me the correct, and also I'm hard coding it. So let's do target ID there. Right? So passing in 1 will always pass because the return new resource item sets the ID to 1. So let's say it's the ID of 2. This is going to fail now. Now I did make 2 changes, but it's going to fail. First of all, I was passing in 1 there when I should have been using the value of target ID, and I was passing the target ID value was set to 2. Let's change that to 2, and this test will fail because the resource item that is returned from this get method, which is a new resource item, which ID is set to 1. So when we go to the get method, we pass in 2. We say pass me back a new resource item, which hard codes its ID to 1, which is why it fails. So let's go make this work. So we're passing in 2. So what we want to do is, instead of return new resource item, we want to do return resource items.first. Now I need to include link here. So let's go include link using system.link, so that we can do a link on this, or link to entities. System.first, where resource item goes to resource item.id equals the ID that we've passed in. Right? So we're going to get that, we're going to get the value out, and it's going to pass us 1 back. This test should now pass because we're passing in 2. We expect there to be an item in the resource items list with an ID of 2, and we pass that back. Let's have a look. Ta-da! Test passes. Right, what if we, just really quickly, one last thing, get returns. We want to see what happens when we give it an ID, an invalid ID. So fact public void get returns exception when given invalid ID. Okay, so var target ID equals -1. We can't, so I know already in Entity Framework you can't have an ID of -1. Okay, so we're going to act var result equals service.get target ID. So there isn't going to be one in this list, so we want to assert. Now, what do we want to do? We want to return an exception. So we need to wrap this up in a method. Do you remember how we did that in getAll? We did. Oh, we've lost it now, but that's fine. We need to call a method which returns that value. We create a delegate. So delegate goes to delegate dot, or what was it? I can't even remember. Let's go back to Google and see if we can find out. So let's go like this. We'll come back to Google. If I go back here, whoops, and we go back to Google. So we need to do assert throws exception. Let's do it this way this time. So again, thank you Stack Overflow user Nikosi. So let's refresh that to make sure that we've got the. There we go. Oh, yep. Sorry, I've already answered. I've already ticked it. Brilliant. So let's go back to the code. So we're going to use his code or their code. We're going to use that person's code. We're going to go service dot get. We're going to pass in target ID, and we're going to assert that. We're going to call that result. Oh, bother. Result. If I can type. So what do we need to assert? We need to assert the throws exception. Assert dot throws type of, we'll just do exception for now, result. So this will automatically pass, but we want a specific exception out. So let's do that. So we're going to pass in -1. It's not going to match on this first, and it's going to throw an exception. But we want to throw a custom exception in a moment, and we will do that in a moment. We just could do this first. And we're going to go, oh brilliant, the test passes. But we don't want that. We want a custom exception to be thrown. This, again, never be fooled by this, okay? So let's do this. Oh, goodness. Right, okay. So, system, exception, system. So, we expected an exception, but it actually threw an invalid operation exception, and that's because we did a first on a sequence that doesn't contain the value. Right, so how about we go var item equals resource item dot first, and then we do if item is not equal to null. No, if item is equal to null, reduces our nesting, and then otherwise we're going to do return item. we'll see why we had deleted, soft deleted very soon. So we're going to return. What we'll do is we'll create. A brand new exception of here. Public class resource item dot found exception string message which extends exception. Oh bother! I've gone and messed that up, haven't I? Oh no, I don't want. Oh bother! Oh bother! I've broken this completely. Let's try that again. I don't know what I did there. Let's try that again. Oh bother! I've lost one of my windows. There we go. So let's try that again. So we're going to create a new class called resource not found exception. We're going to extend exception. We're going to go ccore resource item not found exception string message extends base message. Okay, now we can put that up here if we want. There we go. We don't actually need the body for anything. We'll put this in its own place. I've put a beta on the end there. Well done me. Put this in its own file and we'll refactor that later. Public. What? No, undo. I created a constructor. I didn't want the constructor. We wanted. Put it in there. Okay. So resource item not found exception exists there. We'll call this source.exceptions. Exceptions. And we've got that there. Right. So we need to do using source.exceptions, and that way we can just do throw a new exception. So in here, remember we passed in 2, that failed. So we'll do throw new resource item not found exception. Could not, let's use string interpolation. Could not find resource with ID, with ID of squigglies, and then we'll do ID. Not OD, ID. So for those of you who don't know what string interpolation does, that is syntactic sugar around string.format, and that replaces the value of ID, replaces these squiggly brackets with the value of ID at runtime. So let's save that. Let's try this again. So this is going to fail because this is not going to throw a type of exception. We want a resource not found exception. Oh bother! I'm so bad at typing today. Using source.exceptions. We want resource not found exception. I wonder whether I caught that just in time. No, I didn't. Okay, so this is going to be sequence content. So why don't we do this first or default? Or no, we'll leave it as first. We'll see what happens because I was making a lot of changes. We'll leave it as first and see what happens. I think I need to change it to first or default, but we'll see. Maybe we'll use find instead. Find might work better. Let's have a look. Go to definition of first. Whilst we're doing the test, I think it's find that we need. Yeah, we need find actually. Yeah, we need find. So let's do that. Find. Let's do that. Oh, okay. So the coder Chris just asked. I missed it earlier on. The coder Chris just asked on the Twitch chat. What a great way to use the Twitch platform. Are you using OS X or a skin on Ubuntu? I'm actually on Mac OS X. I'll get the actual version number for you because why not? So I am on, I'm on High Sierra 10.13.5, and I'm using VS Code and .NET Core. Hopefully you've been around for long enough to understand what's going on, Coder Chris. Also, hello, Coder Chris. I apologise for my the GPU. So the GPU I'm using in this MacBook Air is a MacBook Air, so the GPU isn't very powerful. So a lot of people have told me that the live stream is very stuttery, or at least the video footage of my face, this bit here, is very stuttery, whereas the rest of the stream is fine. In which case, if you really want to see me not being all stuttery and robotic, then it will be worth watching the YouTube version of this. So what I do is I stream live and I record local, and then after the stream has gone out live, I upload the local recording to YouTube. I could copy the stream across, because there's a button in Twitch to export to YouTube, but that would export the version where the video footage of my face is very stuttery. I know what the problem is. Like I say, it's because of the graphics card in this, the graphics chipset in this MacBook Air. Bless it, it's trying. But there you go. So yes, right. So my tests all passed. There's some problems here, but we'll come back to those in a moment. So my test passed. So when we pass in a 2 or a -1, we expect to find a resource not found exception. One last thing to try is what happens if somebody sets is deleted to true. So fact, whoops, need a capital F. So when it's been deleted, effectively we want to say that it doesn't exist. So public void, I'll do this one test and then I'll call it quits for today, I think, because it's a lovely day outside and I'm missing it all. Get returns exception when given ID of resource item marked as deleted. Okay, so this requires us to make a tiny change here in the create resource item. So the create resource item is just returning these. So let's do bool is deleted false. So what I've done here is I've created an optional variable in my constructor called is deleted. It's always going to be false unless I set it to another value. So that means I can leave these as they are, and they'll come back as fine. They'll come back perfectly fine. So let's do resource item factory.create resource item, and we'll go true. So we know that this one will have an ID of 1, this one will have an ID of 2, and this one will have an ID of 3, because they're executed in that order. This one is going to be marked as is deleted true. So let's do act. Now we need var target ID equals 3. So ArtSplunge, hey ArtSplunge, they've just said on the Twitch chat, the live stream is kind of choppy, as you mentioned. I'm still getting used to the delay between hearing your keyboard and actually seeing the code on screen, but I can adjust. It's great to see streamers doing .NET. Thank you very much, ArtSplunge. It's very kind of you. Like I say, it's directly related to my MacBook Air and the speed at which my upload is locked. My internet access upload speed is locked to just under a megabyte. That's why I record locally as well as stream up. I'm hopefully going to fix both of those things really quite soon. So I apologize that you're hearing me type and then you're seeing it on screen. But like I say, the YouTube version will have none of those issues because I'm recording locally. So what was I doing? Ah yes, so target of 3. In CTOR, we set this res item to is deleted true. So we'll need to remember to refactor this out later, but that's fine. So we're going to go act, and we're going to do the result equals, oh no, we're going to do the same thing. We want the same thing to happen. So let's do, we don't need to have our result at all. So this one is going to be marked as is deleted, and if it is deleted, we want it to return the exception. this isn't going to return the exception because the resource item with the ID of 3 exists in our temporary data set. We'll eventually in another stream create a repository and a fake repository to be able to handle all of these. So let's have a look. It failed. Get return exception, get returns, that should be returns exception when given ID of resource marks is deleted. Assert throws failure, expected, not found, and the exception was not thrown. So we need to go make this work. So we don't need that, we need our resource service. So if the item is null, or item that is deleted, return that. So what we're saying here is if we can't find the item, or if we can and it's been marked as deleted, we want to throw the exception, because we don't want an average user to accidentally find the item that has been deleted, because it's obviously been deleted for a reason. And our tests pass. And that, I think, is going to do it for now, because we've done the read. We want CRUD eventually. We want create, read, update, and delete. We've done the read so far. We've done get all and get. In a future stream, so the plan is in a future stream, what we're going to do is we're going to use a repository. So if I switch back to here, we're going to use a fake repository, and we're going to do searching, but we won't do that yet because that's an advanced topic, in that it's not something that's as simple and easy to do in a 1 hour 48 stream with a whole bunch of other stuff. So just to recap what we've done today, excuse me, I'll move my mouse over here. So what we've done today in this stream is we've created the resource item and we've fully tested it. We now know that it has properties called name, it has properties called location, and we have a property called isDeleted. We also have created a method which gets all of these things. Now it isn't technically 100% correct because we're not probing to a database, but we are probing to the service has in effect a DB set, a repository of these items. And we are also, where are we? We are also getting the values out. We're reading the values as a group and we're reading the values as a single. So we are able to get all of the resource items out of the database, and we were able to get one resource item out of the database. In here, the database is a wobbly term. It's not really a database, it's a wobbly term for let's go back to my code. So database here essentially means this list here. Now in a future stream we'll change this so that that list becomes a repository or a data store or something, and we'll do that at another stage. But remember, red green refactor means you write a failing unit test, the minimal amount of the code to make the test pass, and then you move on, right? So it's okay for now that this is a list within the service class. Eventually we're going to create an interface that we pass in, and we'll also eventually make resource item, where are we? Let's just go to here. We'll also make resource item extend an interface that matches isDeleted, so we don't have to give it the property of isDeleted, it will just have one. So eventually we'll do this on another stream, and I'll undo the code in a moment, but we'll eventually have public interface I is deletable. I is deletable. I is deleted. I is deleted. Which doesn't make sense grammatically, but I is deleted, and this will have a bool is deleted like that, and we'll figure it out from there. What does it want? But yes, we'll do something like that, just to make it easier, so that then if we add any more database entities, and we could just give it is deleted. We'll probably use a shadow property for that. These topics, all of the stuff that I'm talking about in this video, are all covered in get my hand facing the right way, in blog posts at that address, .netcode.coprogman.com. If you want to learn more about some of the stuff like what are shadow properties, what is test-driven development, what repository is, that kind of thing, head over to the blog or give me a shout on Twitter. My Twitter handle's at the opposite end of the video to where I am right now, and let me know what you think. I'll put, for those of you watching on Twitch, I will put a better quality version of this video on YouTube, and I'll send a link maybe through Twitter. I'll put a link on my Twitter to it once it's uploaded. It will take a while. So until next time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go commit this code. In fact, can I do that now? I'll do it another time. I'm going to go commit this code into my feature branch because I'm kind of getting towards there. I'm edging towards a resource item service with tests. So once this is up, if you head over to, where are we? If you head over to GitHub, where are we? Where's my mouse pointer? There we go. If you head over to github.com/coprogman/OpenCoreMDB to this repo, and then switch to the development repo or whichever development branch or whichever branch it is, you'll then be able to see this and you'll see the code evolve. Currently, I'm looking at the master branch and I want to commit to a feature branch that is branched off of development, but that's fine. We'll do that. And yeah, so for those who came in late, take a look at the code of conduct, because I want to, if you want to contribute to this either through logging issues or even if you want to log code, it's not a problem. But I do need you to agree to that code of conduct, because we're all groovy people, we're all nice people, we're not going to be horrible to each other. It is fully open source software, and anyone who does contribute towards the project will have their name on a contributors page. It's already on the contributor list here, so you can see already that I'm listed in this list here. There I am. I'm already listed here, which is fine. But what I would like to do is have a markdown file full of the contributors, and not contributors in how much code they've added, because that's what that contributor tab is for, but just the list of people who have helped to build the system. I don't mind whether you've submitted an issue, whether you've helped with some code, whether you've just asked me a question, whether you've changed any spelling mistakes that I have, anything like that, anything at all. If you want to help, you can. If you don't want to help, that's also fine. Anyway, I think that's going to do it for now, because I've now been talking for nearly 2 hours, and I've got to go and edit this slightly to take out a few bits here, there and everywhere and just tighten it up. And thank you for joining me if you're on Twitch and you've watched some of this live. I know that there are problems with my with the ability that I have to stream. It's not fantastic, but we'll get there. And if you're watching on YouTube, thank you ever so much for watching on YouTube. Either way, like, subscribe, tell people, whatever it is that you do. I've just had a message come through, so I'll check that. Where's my mouse pointer? There we are. So thank you, CodeChris. So CodeChris has said, woot, thanks for streaming. You're very welcome, CodeChris. If you liked it, let me know, and I'll try and do a better one with a slightly better internet connection, and we'll see what we can do. Maybe I can use I seem to have a better internet connection when I go to my parents' house, but that's like 90 miles away. I don't mind travelling if it means that you guys can see it better. So in that respect, I shall, with all that being said, I shall see you again another time. Thank you all for watching. Thank you very much.